there was this pastor who was teaching his Sunday school about the idea of being yoked in service to Christ. And so he asked his Sunday school, "Why do I wear this collar?" This little boy pipes up and goes, "To keep away fleas and ticks for 30 days? Jonathan, John Michael, Honor, anybody who might be following us on Facebook or on Zoom, what is the opposite of light? Darkness. The opposite of light is darkness. And Jesus, of course, is the light that came into the world, right? And we light the candles every Sunday as a reminder that Jesus is the light that came into the world. Light being the presence of God. Then dark would represent the absence of God. The absence of His presence. And think about this. The dark can be scary. When it's light out and you hear a noise in your house, you don't think, "What was that noise?" But when the house is dark and everybody's in bed and you hear a noise, it can be scary. The dark can be dangerous. I am not the only person, I am sure, but I have broken a toe trying to navigate my house in the dark. Now I realize that's just a small thing, but I was in my own house. So the dark represents the absence of God. The dark can be scary. The dark can be dangerous. And the dark can be empty. Because our life without God is empty. I did a mind tour. One of the nice things about living in Northeast Pennsylvania is that you can tour mine, if you think that's a nice thing. But one of the first things they do after they take you down into this mine, so you're under the earth, the only light is what they pump in there, they turn off all the lights. Now you've never been in there before, you have no idea how big the space is, and you literally can't see your hand in front of your face. You know, we always say it was so dark I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And normally you can, that may be as far as you can see. But you could not see a thing. And you had no idea how big this space was. You had no idea what was in this space. It just seemed like a big, dark, empty void. And that's what our life is without God. It is scary, it is dangerous, and it is empty. Jesus is the light that came into the world. He is the light that shines in our lives. We are in darkness, and He brings light to us. So that's our children's lesson. And this morning, yes, I do remember it's Easter. It is going to be an Easter sermon. But we're going to focus on the details that we see in John chapter 1, or John chapter 20, the first several verses of John chapter 20. And the details matter. That's why they're there. You know, we always want to rush through and get to the big parts. But you think about this, John tells us that so many other things Jesus did that they would fill books. Can't put them all in there. But these He recorded that we would believe, and that by believing have life. And so John's telling us that there are a lot of other miracles, so many other miracles that, man, you could never write them all down in books. You'd spend all your life writing them. But yet He includes these details, and they must be important. Because if it really wasn't all that important that Mary Magdalene went when it was still dark, don't you think John would have left that out and put a more juicy tidbit in there? And there was this guy, you wouldn't believe the leprosy he had. But he doesn't. He gives us these details. He gives us the details of Mary Magdalene going and finding the tomb empty and running to Simon. And we should ask why they are there. The details matter. But I will say this, and this is a very important caveat, because so often we focus on the details and not why they're really there. The details matter only in regard to how it tells us about Jesus, what he's done, and how we respond to him. So we're going to look at several of the details this morning, and we've already looked at darkness, or the dark, and we want to look at them and how they relate to Jesus, what he's done, and how we relate to him. The second detail is she runs when she finds the tomb empty. There is a desperation there. This is one of those instances where, again, we always say, that's the last straw. But this is one of those cases where it really is. Her whole life was based in who Jesus was and what he had done for her. And then he is killed. And so she goes to the tomb in the dark. And for her it would be dangerous because he wasn't the most popular character at the time. They just killed him because they hated him, not because he had done anything wrong, but out of spite and malice and hate. And yet she goes. She is facing a very depressing end to the hope which animated her life. And she goes and she finds the tomb empty. She's got to be thinking, I can't even anoint his body. This is the final indignity. She is desperate. And we should see that. Our sin should make us desperate for God. We should realize that all our efforts at being good in our own strength have come crashing down upon us in one final huge indignity. We aren't able. And we need to be running and looking for Jesus. So often we view ourselves as, well, I'm a good person. Well, I know I am. I'm a pastor, so of course I'm a great person, right? But the reality is that our sin confronts us, and we should realize in one final and glorious moment that our lives are empty apart from Jesus. And like Mary, we need to be desperately seeking Jesus. We are in the dark without him. We are desperate without him. We need him. As Christians, we need to understand that we are still sinners in need of God's grace. And Jesus is the one who brings us that grace. James Patterson has done a series of books which has like 432 books in it, because James Patterson has people write for him. It's the Women's Murder Mystery Club. And Ginger and I listen to them, books on tape. It's like reading without the effort. And the last one we listened to, the killer is killing people with a poisonous snake that has very small fangs so that you can't really see the bite. Whether the snake really has very small fangs or not, I don't know, but that was the basis of the story. And so the heroine's partner gets bitten by a snake. They have figured out who it is, and they're at the house, and he gets bitten. And they are desperate to get him the antidote. They're desperate to save this man's life. And the story changes from being revolving around they're at the killer's house, they're going to bring this to a conclusion, to revolving around the desperation to save this man's life. And we should have that desperation for God, for His cure for our sin. I use this book not just because we just finished it a couple weeks ago, but that's always a good reason. But God used snakes in the Old Testament to teach the people of Israel the very same thing. There's an antidote to the poison that destroys us, and that is looking to God. And the poison that destroys us isn't from snakes or jellyfish or anything else in the world. The poison that destroys us is our own sin. Jesus is the antidote to our sin, and we must recognize our desperate need for His cure. Now, it's not only our sin which makes us desperate. The sins of others often makes us desperate. We love stories where the underdog pulls it out in the end. It's entirely impossible. But it happens. And while that makes great movies and great books, the reality is that in life, it doesn't always go that way. The hero or heroine doesn't overcome just enormous odds and save the day all the time. Often, cruelty and sin goes on for generations and generations. Hatred can bind people for decades and upon decades. And sometimes it's not just our sin, but it's the sins of the world that make us desperate. Things look so dark. How can people be so cruel? And in that desperation, we realize in the resurrection of Jesus that this is not the end. This is not the sum of it all. We will be raised. Jesus was raised from the dead to promise that we will be raised from the dead. We will be raised where there is no more sin, no more sorrow, no more pain, no more pandemic. We will be raised to new life. And the desperation of our sin should make us seek Jesus, and the desperation of the sin of the world should make us see Jesus, and we should know that He has given us a new nature, and He has brought us into a new kingdom. And He promises His people hope and relief. He has taken away our sin. He rose from the grave so that we can know that the grave will not hold us. We need to be desperate for Jesus, for He is the cure to what ails us and to what ails the world. The last thing is we want to look at, Mary gives us an example of how we are to live in this world. There's darkness, there's desperation, and it's Easter, so I went with alliteration. The last point is she was determined. You know, the last thing I would have wanted to do were I her, and apparently most everybody else thought the same way. Now we are told that other gospel writers record that Mary, the mother of James, went with her, and I think Luke has Mary and Salome going. But still, all the people who follow Jesus, you have a couple of women who are willing to go and finish preparing the body for burial. They are determined to continue to walk in the path that Jesus had given them, and serve him even to the end. Mary goes to the tomb even though it is dark and things are desperate, and she doesn't understand why it is like it is. And you know, we think as Christians that, well, we'll know why. Someday this will all make sense. And the reality is that it might never make sense to us. God's mind is infinite. Our mind is finite. But what we do know is that in the darkness and in the pain and in the turmoil, we are to follow Jesus. We are to run the race that has been given to us. The pain the pandemic has caused is immeasurable. One of the saddest things that I saw, because you know we live right by the graveyard for Immaculata. Right after the pandemic started, Ginger and I would go for walks, and there would be people being interred, and the only people there were from the funeral home. Families not being able to say goodbye to loved ones because they couldn't visit them in the hospital, they couldn't go to the nursing homes because they couldn't have services to say goodbye. Like it's not hard enough to lose somebody you care about, but to have them face death alone and to not be able to be there with them. And it's easy to look at that and say, I don't understand why this is happening. I don't understand why things are the way they are. And the truth of the life of a Christian is often we don't understand why things are the way they are. We know that God is glorified and that God is at work and God promises to work all things together for good, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we see it. But what we do understand and what we do know is that we will be raised into the newness of life. We can go through the trials of this life determined to follow Jesus, determined to walk the path he has given us because of who Jesus is, what he has done, what he is doing, and what he will do in our lives. There is much pain and confusion in the world today. I'm pretty arrogant, just ask me. I know the answer. I look at the confusion in the world today and I can't even begin to understand half of it. I mean, I look around and I just think, this is nuts. How long will we continue like this? And of course the answer is, if you chart the human history, as long as there are people. That's how long we will continue like this. When have there not been wars going on? When have there not been people at enmity with one another? When has there not been illness, disease? When have there not been earthquakes and fires and famines? Well, I can tell you when there was not. Right before they took the fruit and ate it, since then it's not been so good. The first brothers born to humanity, one killed the other. And we've been that way ever since. The answer to the world around us isn't our comprehension. The answer to the world around us isn't just a little more on education. People will do so much better, and isn't this great? The answer is Jesus. We can go through this life because of who Jesus is and what he has done for us and what he will do for us. He will raise us to everlasting life. I may not be able to understand the half of what's going on in the world today, but I can understand and know this, that because Jesus rose, he has brought light into our darkness. Because Jesus rose, he has given us hope in our desperation. Because Jesus rose, we can press on, knowing the certainty of our future, even though there's great uncertainty in our present. Because Jesus rose, we have hope and a light and a future in him. Let us pray.